Margaret had devoted 30 years of her life to the intricate, often unseen world of domestic service. As a housekeeper, she had moved through countless residences, witnessing the full spectrum of human experience, from staggering wealth and grinding poverty to profound kindness and sharp cruelty. But nothing in that long career had prepared her for the tableau she encountered on her first day at the legendary Harrison estate. The vast, cavernous ballroom, built to hold hundreds, fairly shimmered, its polished parquet floor reflecting the cold, brilliant light of a dozen crystal chandeliers. It was the CEO's annual charity gala, a mandatory gathering of the city's elite, and Margaret had been hired only that morning to lend a seasoned hand to the overworked catering staff. At 62, her pace was undeniably slower than in her youth, the decades of kneeling and scrubbing etched into her joints, yet her gaze remained as piercing and comprehensive as ever. She was a ghost in the machine of high society, and she saw everything. James Harrison, the host and centerpiece of the spectacle, dominated the center of the room in his impeccably tailored charcoal suit, efficiently shaking hands and receiving the orchestrated murmurs of congratulation. His recent tech IPO had catapulted him into the highest echelons, making him one of the wealthiest and most sought-after men in the entire state. Everyone present wanted a sliver of his attention, a chance to be seen basking in his reflected glow. But Margaret's attention was drawn away from the glitter, fixed instead on a figure that stirred a deep, familiar ache in her chest. An echo of the anxieties and fierce protectiveness she remembered vividly from her own intense years of motherhood. A little girl stood isolated at the very edge of the celebration, dwarfed by the towering velvet curtains. She could not have been more than 4 years old. Her fine blonde hair so light it seemed to catch the ambient light and hold it captive, like delicate strands of spun gold. She wore a soft, exquisite pink dress, the kind of garment clearly chosen with painstaking affection and care, perhaps by a doting grandmother. Her name, Margaret had quickly learned, was Emma, Mr. Harrison's daughter. The child stood unnaturally still, observing the swirling, noisy crowd with wide, cautious eyes that held a profound uncertainty. Her tiny hands restlessly worked at the folds of her skirt. Every few moments, she would attempt a tentative step toward the flow of guests, only to halt abruptly, retreating as though an invisible, solid pane of glass separated her from the rest of the world and the joyous noise it produced. Margaret watched, immobilized for a moment, as a flawlessly dressed woman glided past Emma without so much as a registering glance. Then a man in an absurdly expensive tuxedo did the exact same thing. The little girl tentatively extended a hand toward a group convulsed by laughter, but she quickly snatched it back when the gesture went completely unacknowledged. Margaret had witnessed this particular kind of solitary vulnerability before. Not in dazzling grand ballrooms, perhaps, but certainly in the harsh, overwhelming fluorescent lights of grocery stores and the frantic energy of crowded playgrounds. She had seen that exact silent struggle mirrored in the face of her own grandson, before the doctors had finally provided them with the necessary vocabulary to understand. Autism, they designated it now. But to Margaret, it was simply understood as a different, quieter way of inhabiting the world. A world that, to the highly sensitive, often spun too rapidly and resonated far too loud. With a decisive breath, she gently set her heavy tray of champagne flutes onto a nearby sideboard. Her supervisor, the formidable Mrs. Peterson, would undoubtedly scold her later for dereliction of duty, but Margaret knew that some obligations superseded the necessity of keeping a job. Some moments demanded a specific type of fortitude, the quiet, unassuming courage that merely meant being present and showing up for someone. Margaret walked across that expanse of gleaming parquet, the practical click of her sensible service shoes a solitary, steady sound against the din. She knelt down beside Emma, mindful of the painful protest from her old knees, and simply waited. She refrained from speaking immediately. That was the first lesson her grandson had taught her. Some children require the assurance of silence first. They need to know, without question, that you will patiently hold the space for them. Emma's uncertain eyes flickered toward Margaret, then immediately away. But Margaret saw the small flash of recognition there, the quiet acknowledgement that finally, someone had stopped their rush and focused entirely on her. "Hello, sweetheart," Margaret murmured, keeping her voice low and soft, a counterpoint to the orchestral music. "My name is Margaret. I see you standing here completely by yourself." Emma offered no verbal reply, but her small fingers, which had been compulsively fidgeting, paused their restless motion for a profound moment of stillness. "I used to absolutely love to dance," Margaret continued, her voice possessing the gentle, soothing rhythm of a forgotten lullaby. "When I was just a girl, my father would carefully put the old records on the gramophone in our small living room. He'd take my hand, and we would whirl around all the furniture. It was marvelous. It made everything else that was complicated or troubling in the world just vanish for a little while." She allowed a respectful silence to settle, letting the words drift and hang in the air like motes of dust caught in a sunbeam. "The music is playing now," Margaret observed softly, gesturing faintly toward the string quartet. "Would you like to dance with me?" For a long, suspended moment, nothing changed. The opulent gala continued to surge around them, the rise and fall of hundreds of voices mimicking ocean waves. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed with sharp enthusiasm. Somewhere else, glasses clinked in an ostentatious toast to celebration. Then, Emma turned her head and looked directly at Margaret. Really looked at her with clarity and intent. Slowly, with an effort that seemed immense, she extended her small, pink-clad hand. Margaret felt a sudden, sharp prick of tears behind her eyes, but she firmly anchored a warm, gentle smile onto her face instead. She took Emma's hand with every ounce of gentleness she possessed and slowly rose, bringing the child up with her. Together, they moved with unhurried purpose toward the precise center of the ballroom floor. The crowd did not immediately part for them, nor did anyone seem to notice the new pairing at first, but Margaret found she simply did not care. She held Emma's hand securely and began to sway with a measured slowness to the sophisticated, soft melody drifting from the string quartet tucked discreetly into the corner. Emma's movements were tentative and unsure at the outset, but Margaret deliberately followed the child's innate rhythm, not the complex beat of the music. When Emma shifted and stepped slightly to the left, Margaret accommodated her instantly. When the child froze and paused, Margaret paused too, holding the moment steady. This particular dance was not about achieving perfect, rehearsed steps or executing graceful, sweeping turns. This was purely about the profound human need to be seen, to be held gently in a moment that unequivocally declared, "You matter exactly as you are right now." Gradually, Margaret became aware that the torrent of conversations swirling around them had begun to ebb. Heads turned almost simultaneously. People stopped, suspended mid-sentence, their attention drawn to the unexpected sight. There, in the conspicuous heart of all that staggering wealth and cold sophistication, was an aging housekeeper, dressed plainly in a simple black uniform and crisp white apron, dancing with a bewildered little girl in pink. The child's blonde hair bounced softly with the subtle movement. Her face, which moments before had been so unnaturally rigid and uncertain, now held the delicate hint of a smile. Margaret saw James Harrison abruptly push his way through a cluster of important guests. For an instant, she felt a wash of professional panic, worrying that she had severely overstepped her bounds, that he would be furious at the intrusion, furious at the unexpected attention drawn to his private daughter. But when she finally registered his expression, she understood everything. His face held a complex mixture of emotions that she recognized immediately and intimately. The complicated, aching love of a parent who did not always possess the map to reach their own child. The raw pain of watching your daughter stand utterly alone at her own father's party. And now the dawning, overwhelming gratitude for a stranger who had simply stopped rushing and, instead, cared. He stood rigidly at the perimeter of the dance floor, his powerful CEO composure fracturing just enough to reveal the vulnerable father underneath. His eyes glistened visibly as he watched Emma's small, pale hand resting in Margaret's strong, weathered one. The string quartet transitioned into a new piece, something even softer and slower than the last. Margaret gently guided Emma to a stop and knelt down once more, purposefully bringing herself to the child's eye level. "You are a truly wonderful dancer," she whispered, her voice conspiratorial. And your daddy is immensely proud of you. Do you see him standing right over there? Emma's gaze shifted to her father. For just a suspended moment, their eyes locked across the short distance. And in that instantaneous connection, Margaret witnessed a crucial shift. A door opening just a hairline crack. James Harrison began to cross the gleaming floor toward them. Then he knelt beside them both, his movements stiff with suppressed emotion, and without uttering a single word, he slowly extended his large hand toward his daughter. Emma looked back at Margaret, her gaze questioning, as if silently asking for permission. Margaret nodded, her smile as warm and reassuring as summer sunshine. Go dance with your daddy, sweetheart, she encouraged. He's been waiting a long, long time. And then Margaret did what she always understood how to do best. She quietly stepped back. She retreated fully, allowing the moment, precious and fragile, to belong entirely to them. Father and daughter danced together in the center of that magnificent ballroom while the hundreds of influential guests watched, held captive in respectful, absolute silence. James Harrison moved with the same careful, deliberate tenderness Margaret had displayed, conscientiously following Emma's subtle lead, honoring her unique, halting rhythm. His expensive gray suit jacket occasionally brushed against the soft fabric of her pink dress as they swayed. United, Margaret watched from the shadows, her old heart overflowing with a profound sense of fulfillment. She thought about all the relentless, quiet years she had spent diligently cleaning other people's homes and serving at hundreds of their parties. She had often pondered if her labor truly mattered, if her simple presence made any perceptible difference inside these enormous, cold houses where people possessed everything that money could purchase. But now, in this luminous moment, she knew the undeniable answer. Kindness always mattered. Paying close attention always mattered. The simple, humble act of stopping, of bending down to a lonely child's level, of having the courage to ask them to dance. These were the things that mattered most of all. As the opulent evening slowly wound down, Margaret conscientiously returned to her assigned duties. But the atmosphere had subtly, permanently shifted. Several guests, their faces earnest, approached her just to offer their thanks. One well-dressed woman, tears visible in her eyes, quietly confessed that she had a young nephew she often struggled to communicate with. A highly successful man mentioned his own shy daughter who found social situations painfully challenging. Before the lengthy night concluded, James Harrison sought Margaret out. He found her standing quietly near the swinging kitchen doorway. He paused there, this powerful man who effortlessly commanded international boardrooms and routinely made decisions valued at millions. "Thank you," he managed to say simply. His voice was husky, raw with an emotion he clearly struggled to contain. "You saw her. When every single person in that room, including myself, failed to, you saw her." Margaret offered him a gentle smile, her lined face radiating an aged, compassionate understanding. "She just needed someone to meet her precisely where she was," she said softly. "And truthfully, we all do, don't we? At any age. We all just want someone to really see us and, by their actions, say, yes, you belong here too." James nodded once, unable to articulate anything more for a moment. Then he did something that genuinely surprised them both. He reached out and wrapped his arms around her, hugging the stranger. This new housekeeper who had arrived that day and irrevocably changed the landscape of his world in the span of a single, unforgettable dance. When Margaret finally left the Harrison estate late that night, her feet aching severely and her back protesting from the strain, she carried something far more precious than her nightly wage. She carried the luminous memory of a little girl's emerging smile. She carried the ghost of a small, trusting hand placed confidently in hers. And she carried the profound knowledge that in a relentless world that often speeds too fast and insists on speaking far too loud, there remains a sacred, vital room for gentleness. There is still room for those who possess the wisdom to stop, to kneel down, and to ask that most fundamental of questions. Would you like to dance with me? And sometimes, on the best, most unexpected days, the answer is a simple, miraculous yes.